Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McClernand, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, welcome back to Between the Before and After. I'm very excited to have my guest, Lesley Holiday, with me today. And, sorry, did I say holiday or holiday? I'm like...
It is holiday season, so it's actually Holloway.
I just had a momentary brain fart. It was like, did I say holiday? Sorry. That's the fun part about this being live is we don't get to rewind and we go, let's edit that one out. No, we'll keep that one. How are you doing, Lesley?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we dive into your story here, which is really quite a remarkable one, I always like to give people a little kind of snapshot of where you're at right now, kind of what's going on with you, and if people want to get in touch with you, where they can find you, and then we'll dive into your story and some of the things you've overcome.
So I am the managing partner of a large personal injury law firm here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I supervise a staff of, overall, we have almost 100 employees. A lot of those employees, over half, report directly to me. So I have a large staff, a lot of attorneys, and so I'm doing that daily. I'm also a mom of two little boys. So I have that on my plate. And I am just typically working, volunteering for their school, trying to, we have over 2,000 litigation files that we're working on.
Wow. Okay.
So it's a large practice. So I'm doing that.
So you're a lawyer.
Yes.
Yes. Among other things, you're a lawyer, you're a mom, you're many other things as well. But in your profession, you're a lawyer. And I think about how the legal profession is presented in television shows and series and movies and things like that. And kind of my thought is that I'm curious, actually, when you watch it and you watch representations of lawyers on things like that, what kind of runs through your head?
Well, I think that I was definitely more intrigued by those shows before I actually became a lawyer. I did go to school for acting for my undergrad. And
fair enough.
I think that I originally thought I just wanted to be playing the lawyer on TV rather than being an actual lawyer.
Being one in real one, yeah.
Yeah, I grew up watching LA Law, I think was a big show back when I was sort of a kid. It wasn't quite the Law and Order, but if they have good advisors on set, I think that they can really get it right. And some of those legal things can be really intriguing. I mean, I'll still get sucked into a Law and Order marathon, but that's criminal. Yeah. And so it's different from what I do. I do civil law.
There maybe isn't quite as much drama in that. I think most times, I guess, if they're going to do a show around something legal, it's usually going to involve criminal and oftentimes like murder or like something that's really dramatic and something that has a storyline that just pulls us in and kind of compels us. And so, but I think, so you might still have an opportunity to act as a lawyer.
I did some volunteer work for a scholarship where the lawyers get together and put on sort of a show, sort of a Saturday Night Live type show. So I have done some acting still, but I don't know. I don't know what the future holds with that.
That would be kind of fun to be like, well, I was a lawyer in real life for X number of years, so now I get to play one, and maybe you could be like a singing musical lawyer, just to like, just to,
wouldn't that be great?
Right. Going into, has there been a musical drama around a courtroom sort of story?
Well, I don't know about a musical drama. They made Legally Blonde into a musical for Broadway.
Oh, fair enough.
And,
okay.
That was a really big hit. And then A Few Good Men, which a lot of people are familiar with, it was actually a play the one with
Okay.
Tom
Yeah.
Cruise. Not a musical, but it was a play before it became a
Yeah.
movie. So
I'm just picturing like the juries would be like a chorus where they like sing something out, and everyone you'd dramatically present your case in song. That would be quite something. And then I'd imagine the judge would be like just like this kind of like deep baritone, like kind of booming voice or something like that. I don't know. There's an idea, just planting seeds for the future.
yeah, maybe you're onto something.
Could be. My wife does some performing and producing and whatnot, and so in local theater, and so yeah, maybe we could convince her to try to put something like that on, because she likes these legal dramas and things like that as well. So um,
Yeah, you never know.
yeah. So here we're planning out your future.
Yeah.
When
Sounds good.
yeah, great. It sounds like a great plan. And I guess I'm kind of curious. You have like a lot on your plate in terms of like being a lawyer, and it's probably potentially long hours, and you work in the realm of like civil law and personal injury, I think. um how does that sort of affect, like, because I just picture there it's not nearly as exciting maybe as it's presented to be in terms of the law profession, and there's like maybe a lot of like slogging and like hard work, or maybe you're now more managing people than you are managing cases. Is that right?
So I am managing people more than I am managing cases these days. So, and that's a very difficult thing to do is manage
Yeah.
people. Working up a case is, I don't want to say it's easy. I mean, each case is different, and
Hmm.
but I've been doing it for almost 15 years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
working a case is something that I can do just because I've done it for so long,
Right. Yeah.
versus dealing with people. It's a more challenging because you're just getting so many different types of personalities that you have to deal with and try to get the best performance from for their work.
Mm-mm-mm.
So I'm kind of always coming up with different strategies for how to manage people.
Yeah.
So I definitely do that more than I actually work on the cases these days.
Yeah, humans and one such are more complicated than cases, because with cases you're trying to deal with factual realities versus the sort of unpredictability of the human condition.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
human condition is what we study because we are picking juries. And
Mm,
when you're doing jury selection, there are dozens of books on jury selection and the philosophy behind it, and how do you pull out people's bias and inherent thoughts on whatever topic you're trying to approach in trial. How do you pull all of that out of them in the 45 minutes you have to pick a jury? So it is really a study of human beings in a lot of ways.
mm, mm,
So
mm. Fair enough. So, and that's part of why we have this podcast here as well, is to explore people's sort of human stories, and our tagline is the stories that shape us. And so, of course, I wanted to dive into your story as well, and kind of how it shaped the path that you've traveled. And um, I think one of the major elements in your story, and maybe we get a little bit of backstory to this, but ultimately it was the tragic passing of your mother at the age of 10. But if we rewind just a little bit before that, you give us a bit of a backstory, kind of about your childhood and things leading up to that. I believe you grew up in small town Texas. Is that right?
yes, I was born in Tyler, Texas, and that was the big city.
Okay.
I grew up in a small town, Mineola, which I looking back, I really loved being from a small town because I think
Mhm.
that it's just kinder in a lot of ways
Yeah.
to grow up in a small town and not the big city. So they're just it's just a kinder atmosphere, I think, for kids. But I wouldn't say that my childhood. My son asked me the other day, was it easier being a kid or an adult? And I wouldn't say my childhood was particularly happy. I mean, it
Hmm.
wasn't
Hmm.
it wasn't terrible earlier, before my mom passed, but
Hmm.
it was difficult. My parents had gone through a divorce when I was 6, um,
Okay. Yeah.
and I was being raised by my mom, and my dad was a builder, and so this was the late '80s when building wasn't so great, and the market wasn't
Right.
so great for that. So we had some financial struggles as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. And what a kind of profound question to be asked by your son. Is life easier as a kid or as an adult?
Yeah, he has some insightful things to say. That one, my 8-year-old, he's a thinker.
And what was his thoughts on that?
Well, I think he has a lot of empathy, and
Hmm.
so I think he thought that it was pretty sad to uh, for me to say that I didn't have a particularly happy childhood,
Mm-mm.
and he felt sorry. He said, "Oh, I feel so sorry for you," and and which I'm like, well, don't. I mean, it's more of an observation than it is with
Right,
emotion
right.
attached to it at this point.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. And so, you were living with your mom, and you were visiting an aunt of yours,
Mhm.
um, when you came across your mom, and share what you're comfortable with, but kind of, I guess lay the scene a little bit here. What happened, and what was going on when you discovered her, and kind of what went through your head?
Yeah, so it's amazing the kind of clarity you can still have and remember when such a big event happens to you, even at such a young age. And there was no indication that
Hmm.
anything like
Hmm.
that was going to happen. My aunt was out of town, so I had a older cousin, but she was still in high school, and she'd asked my mom and I to come over and stay with her while they were out of town.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I remember we went and rented some movies from Blockbuster
Yeah, back in
and
the day.
came back. And I had stayed up and watched one movie with her. I can't remember the movie I watched, but I remember she was going to stay up and watch Monty Python.
Okay, yeah,
And
classic.
yeah, and so she went and put me in the guest room, said goodnight. Um, and it was a school night. It was a Monday, and
Hmm.
I remember that. Also, put me to bed, said I love you, all the things. There was no indication, no,
Yeah,
she was
yeah.
ill. She had diabetes and
Hmm.
had a really hard time managing it. And like I said, we had financial struggles, so insulin was not cheap.
Mm.
So just her management, and diabetes was so much harder to manage back in the 80s than it is now. They've really made a lot of
Yeah.
good progress with that. But yeah, so I woke up to get ready for school, and she was lying in the living room floor, and I walked in, and just something inside of me knew immediately, and when I got close to her,
Hmm.
and I leaned down to touch her, and she was cold to the touch, and my
Mm.
heart just sank, and I knew. And my cousin came in, and I was like, I need to call my dad. And she
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
what's going on? And I said, I think she's dead. And my cousin's like, oh no, we need to call an ambulance, or I'm gonna call the neighbor. And I just remember thinking, I need to call my dad. I need to call my dad. And
Yeah, yeah.
so she calls the neighbor, and the neighbor comes over, and then they decide to call the ambulance. And in my mind, I just remember thinking, it's too late for this. Like, this is too late.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, even as a child, knowing that it was too late for all of that. Um,
Mm. I
so
think
yeah,
about
it was. And then well, then it was just
yeah,
a lot of activity after that, a big bustle
yeah.
of activity after that. So
But I think about, like,
it
as you
was.
kinda walk into that room, there's something about, like, maybe us as humans, and we can maybe sense the energy of another human, and we can't really put our finger on it necessarily, but when you walk into the room and you see the body there, and you don't feel that, and maybe we can't necessarily describe it exactly, like, what's going on, but there's something intuitively in us that we know, "Okay, it's the time's already passed, like, it's too late to do something about this." And so now there's all this sort of, like, rush and, like, a bustle of activity and whatnot, and you're sitting here trying to, really process what's taking place. I gather you probably wouldn't have went to school that day. How did that day play out for you?
I just looking back, I was in shock, really.
Mhm.
It's that feeling of seeing everything happening around you, but it's like you're part of it and not at the same time. And I remember the police were called. I remember we were waiting on a justice of the peace to come out and declare her dead. I remember when the ambulance got there and they walked in and they took one look at her and was like, there's nothing we can do here. I remember my grandparents coming over, her parents. I remember my brother coming over, and the look on his face when he saw her. I remember mainly calling my dad. I did call him myself and say, you need to come over to my aunt's house. And he could tell immediately something was wrong. And he was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I said, Mom died. And he just said, I'll be there as fast as I can. And he hung up. Obviously there weren't cell phones. You couldn't stay on the phone with somebody in the 80s. So he just hung up and he just flew over there. And I remember, everybody being really concerned about me and sort of, wanting to like keep me in this bubble, and protect me. But it's like, well, I'd already seen the worst of it at that point.
What's to be shielded at that point? Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it was the JP came in and then they, took her away, and I didn't see her again until the funeral home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then kind of going through something like that young, and I don't know how you were given the opportunity to kind of process and navigate that. I think sometimes maybe I'm a child of the 80s as well. We weren't so well equipped. We didn't have the internet as hard as it is to imagine nowadays, but didn't have internet, didn't have cell phones, things like that. Maybe access to information and resources wasn't really the same. How did it kind of affect, at some point in time, you're going to have to go back to school and see your classmates again, kind of go through like your teen years without a mom to ask questions to and so on. And just there's like this gaping absence in your life. How did that shape your kind of ensuing years as you went through high school, your teen years?
Well, it definitely, most of all, it messed with my value and my self-worth, because going through the grieving process as a child, the number one thing you start to think is, what did I do? What did I do wrong? And there's a lot of like, I must have done something bad. And then it sort of became, okay, I didn't do anything bad, but my mom didn't take good care of herself. Why wasn't I worth it to her to take better care of herself? So there's a lot of self-worth issues. And so it made me start, luckily my dad stepped in and was wonderful, but he still didn't fill that void left by my mother. And so I think I just had so many issues with self-worth that I was looking for external validation. So that's why I got, I went through, like a lot of girls, I went through like a little bit of an ugly duckling phase in my middle school years. And I think that I just I was really down on myself a lot. And so then I worked really hard to be physically attractive, to get that validation from other people, to hear that I was, because you look physically attractive, growing up in a girl in East Texas, a lot of time that's what it's about. And so I put a lot of time and effort into that, but it was just never internal. Like my internal self-worth was just never there. And it was always a struggle, especially during teen years.
Yeah. Did that affect friendships, relationships? Did that sort of shape who you maybe like let into your life in that capacity?
Yeah, it definitely did. I think that it was tough to have boyfriends. I sort of felt like I was not ever really, I just didn't really think I was very worthy of being in a relationship or being cared about. So I think that it just really messed with my self-worth in that way, that I had a hard time with boyfriends in particular. I felt like I needed to have a boyfriend, or I needed to have a certain type of boyfriend, or maybe this boyfriend wasn't good enough. I needed, it just was messing with the idea that like who I dated was a reflection of me and my self-worth. So it was really challenging in that way.
Yeah, and some really fascinating and self-aware insights kind of on hindsight and in reflection. And so I wonder, was there any sort of figure that stepped into your life that was a bit of a mother figure to you, or was that just something that was absent for you and you being raised by a single dad, he just did the best he could?
Well, I had several people who were helpful. My mom's best friend was one of those. She really, she really stepped in and tried to do the best she could. But I was very much like, I don't want anybody to replace my mother. I was very sort of standoffish when it came to
Mm,
that idea of somebody trying to replace my mom. I didn't want it. My grandmother was pretty supportive and active in my life. I mean, my grandmother had younger sisters who were very supportive. So there were a lot of support around me, but I didn't want somebody coming in trying to be my mom.
right. Yeah.
Um, I was just like that person's gone, and I'm not gonna try to fill it with somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but my dad, he was, he was in it. I mean, he was ready to step up and take me on full time. He didn't have me full time then. My mom did
Mhm.
because they were divorced, but he was just immediately like, okay, I'm I'm
Yeah.
stepping up.
And I mean, even though they were divorced, I'm just how did he handle the loss of her? Because again, it's something that's sudden, it's unexpected. There's, you might consider like last interactions and things like that. How did he handle that?
Uh it's hard for me to really say as a 10-year-old girl because I was so
Fair.
wrapped up in my
Fair
uh
enough. Yeah.
own tragedy. But I think that he did take it hard. I think that he still had a lot of love for my mom, and um they just had a really tumultuous relationship. And I think it hit all of us hard because it was so unexpected. And she was so young. I mean, she was 38 years old.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just, uh, I think everyone took it hard. I think that he did take it. Um, I think that he felt a little bit like he had still lost the love of his life. Um, and he never remarried. He never,
Yeah.
um, you know, he just sort of dedicated his life to taking care of me.
Yeah. Which is pretty remarkable. And you mentioned having a sibling, older or younger.
Some older brother. He was
Mhm.
actually from my mom's first marriage, so
Okay.
half brother, and he he was he was a senior. I was in
Mhm.
fifth grade, and it was his senior year when this happened.
Yeah. What kind of relationship did you have with him? Like, does he feel like a brother, or was it sort of somewhat because of the age gap? It really wasn't the same, or
It really wasn't the same. I mean, he was so much older and just
yeah.
into different things, and we never really saw eye to eye. Unfortunately, he was he had his own sort of issues with life, just because his dad wasn't present and my dad stepped
Mhm.
in or tried to step in, and there were a lot of issues around that, and so we just were never close. It's funny, we actually didn't speak for about 10 years just
Yeah.
because of how our relationship was. And then after my dad passed, we sort of started talking again through text. And I think that it's been good. I think we feel more like he lost our mother, and so he felt like he lost everything, and that I still have my dad.
Yeah.
So we weren't
Right. Yeah.
quite on the same level. And then once I
Yeah.
lost my dad, it's like, okay, now we've both lost everyone. And
Yeah. Yeah.
somehow that sort of drew us a little bit more together.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough, yet it's interesting how these kind of human experiences can really do that to a relationship, because it makes us maybe think about things differently. And regardless, you're still like a blood connection to him. You know.
Right.
You know. So
Right.
so you ended up pursuing the legal profession and whatnot. You had some difficult relationships because you didn't really know how to maybe navigate a relationship and whatnot. What started to turn the tide for you, where maybe your struggles around self-worth weren't sort of maybe leading to difficult relationships? Because, obviously you found a husband, you got a couple of, beautiful kids and whatnot. So what was that turning point for you?
Well, I think that, and I've only come to realize sort of recently, I don't know that there was really a turning point. I know that my freshman year of high school, I was sort of going down the wrong path. I was
Hmm.
hanging out with a bunch of seniors. I was not doing my schoolwork. I had failed a class. I felt like that was a pivotal moment in my life. And I was out at a party and my dad came and got me from the party, which was super
Yeah.
embarrassing. But I was doing a lot of the things that teenagers do, but I was doing it without a lot of guidance. And we got in a huge fight. And that night I remember was sort of a catalyst to turn the tides. And I, that was one turning point in my life. I
Hmm.
think that
Hmm.
sort of got me on the road to, okay, where am I going in life? And luckily I found acting and singing, and I just loved it so much that I wanted to sort of get my life straight so that I could pursue that. And
Mm.
you couldn't participate if your grades weren't good and all of that. So I think that that helped me to sort of refocus and get myself together. But I still struggled in college, even with relationships. And my relationship with my husband, we've known each other for 20 years, and it's definitely had its ups and downs over those 20 years, but a lot of having to
For
do,
sure.
again, with just my own perception of my own self-worth. And it wasn't until my dad passed that I really had to explore that pretty deeply.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was just
Which
recently.
Yeah, and that's remarkable and again, insightful to say. And I think it's really powerful actually, because let's say we hear a story like this, and like your story isn't complete. There's still a journey that you're on, and so there's so much growth that's taking place just over the years. Inevitably, I mean, the thing about the responsibility of being in a firm and being a managing partner in a firm, being a mother and so on. All of these like life carries on. Life doesn't stop, and you have to carry out all these things. And somewhere in there, you have to try and fit a little bit of time in terms of like processing, growing, and developing. But how fantastic is it to have someone sort of go alongside you? And I think it wouldn't be like a meaningful relationship if there wasn't sometimes some tumultuous times, because inevitably we're two human beings. Like I've been together with my wife for 17 years, and there's been a lot of ups and downs along the way, but we approach it through the lens of like, we're going to figure this out one way or another. Like, yeah, we're going to butt heads, but we're going to figure this out because we decide that we're going to try and kind of grow together. And has that been the case for you, where there's you kind of had some growing and maturing together and whatnot?
Yeah, we did. We got together so young, and then we broke up for a while. We
Yeah.
went our separate ways, and then ultimately chose to come back together after a bit, after a little separation of about 3 to 4 years. Um, we had so many mutual friends. We still kind of knew of each other in the same circles,
Right.
but yeah, I think we needed that. We needed that time to sort of separate. And I feel like I'm sort of constantly working on myself. Uh,
Mm-mm.
and I feel like I have a tattoo on my foot that says eudaimonia, and it's a Greek word for happiness, but what it really means is human flourishing. And I like that because
Mm.
I feel like it's more active and more kind of just there's work attached to it.
Right.
And
Purpose.
I think that's what, yeah, I think that's what is what I'm sort of constantly doing to try to just improve as a human being. So
Yeah, absolutely.
now there was a lot of work between the both of us, but ultimately came
Uh,
back together and figured it out.
I think one of the things that maybe leads human beings to struggle is the idea that happiness is a destination. Like, I'm just
Absolutely.
going to get to this point in my life where all the stars are going to align, and for the rest of my life, it's happily ever after. When we recognize that happiness is a transient state, it's one that comes and goes as we navigate the highs and lows of life. And so we set ourselves up, ironically, to be unhappy when there's this expectation that somewhere in my future is perpetual happiness. And so I
Right.
love that this idea that, this is really about human flourishing. And we find happiness in having a sense of purpose and meaning, or maybe more than happiness, like a sense of fulfillment, and even becoming comfortable with, you talk about you're still a work in progress. And you get to the place, and maybe I'll just ask rather than speak for you, but do you feel like you're now more comfortable about being a work in progress and maybe not feeling like it's something that should be concealed or hidden?
Absolutely. I think that for a long time I wanted to appear as if I had it all figured out, and I wanted to just put that out into the world, like, I know what I'm doing. Don't question me. I've got this. And I feel that way about certain topics. Yeah. If you want to come talk to me about a case in the legal field, I feel really confident in that. And and yeah, at this point I am okay with saying that I'm still learning and I'm still working on myself. And I think that that's a lifelong pursuit.
Mm,
And there's
mm.
nothing wrong with that at all. And
Yeah.
it's even good for you.
Well, absolutely, because again, happiness isn't really this destination. We get to this point in development where we think, I'm supposed to be happy here, and I'm not. Well, it's because there's more, and we recognize when we get to this point that, oh, I actually have capacity for more growth and for more learning, more development, and that's part of like the enriching human sort of experience. And so, one of the things I want to make sure we don't miss here is we're getting near to the end of the episode, but you mentioned the passing of your dad, and that was relatively sudden as well, and that only happened in 2020. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. Around this time in 2020.
2 years ago at the time of recording
Mhm.
this. And was this one unexpected and sudden as well?
It was. He had health problems for several years, but we always thought he was sort of like a cat with nine lives. He always
Mm-mm.
managed to come through it. And I guess he jokingly said that a fortune teller told him once he was going to live to be 82. And so in my mind, I just always thought he would at least get to 82. And
Mhm.
so it was just sudden. It was during COVID, and he just passed suddenly at home. And it was a huge shock. And we talked every single day. I talked to him every day on the way home from work, on the weekends. We were just super close, and
Yeah.
so it was a huge shock. And yeah, it was pretty devastating.
What age was he when he passed?
He was 79 when he
Okay.
passed.
Yeah. And so, you think about how you would have you navigated grief without maybe if I could put it this way, maybe like not a lot of direction or understanding as a child.
Correct. You're right. There wasn't many resources back then to
Right.
help.
This time around, and I wonder, did it bring back, sometimes a traumatic event like that or a shocking event like that can really bring us back to this place mentally and emotionally where we were before. Did you find, maybe to your surprise, that some of these feelings you had experienced as a 10-year-old were coming back to you? You're like, I've been through this before somehow.
I think I was just more about, okay, this day has finally come. When it
Okay.
happened when I was 10, I spent a lot of time living in fear of losing my dad.
Okay.
And so part of it was just, okay, it's finally here, because I had spent so much of my life worrying about him and worrying about when he was going to pass, and sort of like, what am I going to do? Being scared about stability, I think. Obviously, he passed when I was very stable. I mean, I can take care of myself. When you're a young child,
Yes.
you're
Yeah.
worried, like, who's going to take care of me?
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
and so part of it was just like, okay, it's finally here. This day's finally come. And the day I had worried about for 30 years had
Yeah.
finally manifested. And
R-
I
What?
had to deal with all that.
Yeah. And I guess I think about it, and of course, hindsight being 2020. Because you couldn't have known when this day was going to come. But did 30 years of worrying about this, serve you, I guess, really, in a sense?
uh, I always tell my kids, don't spend your time worrying about those things. They've sort of, they've had to be exposed to me losing my dad, and then of course
Mm,
they have questions about death, and then they start asking, well, I'm so worried about the day you're dying. And I say, absolutely do not worry about this. One, you have no control over it. Absolutely none. And I made so many decisions in my life because worrying about being too far away from my dad,
mm, mm, mm.
getting too much distance, not being around, and not being there to jump in if something happened.
Yeah.
Um, it's just, and it did not serve me, I don't think, very well. I think that I made a lot of choices based out of fear rather than wanting to make the choice, but I think just being sort of afraid of losing him.
Yeah. What do you miss most about your dad?
Well, the thing that I've been working on for the past 2 years is the fact that he was so much of a sounding board for me when I had a stressful day or a problem. He just always knew the right thing to say to me. And I remember when COVID hit and no one knew what was going on in the world. And we had just moved and bought a new house and we hadn't sold our other house yet. And I was sort of freaking out. And he just told me, everybody in the world feels this way right now. No one knows what's going on. Everyone feels just like this. You are not the only one. He just always had such a good way of putting things into perspective for me. So I miss that.
Yeah. Yeah. And your kids had the opportunity to get to know him as grandpa as well.
They did. Yeah, they did.
And how did you help them? Because you now know what it's like, and I know losing a grandparent versus a parent isn't quite the same thing, but I imagine there's still some grief connected to that. And you have a sort of different level of empathy because you now understand as a child what it's like to have a significant loss like that. And how did you help them sort of process and navigate that grief at a really young age?
Well, one thing is I didn't try to hide my grief from them. I think that letting them know that it's okay to cry. And sometimes they would see me start to tear up and don't cry, mommy. And I would just remind them, it's okay. It's part of the process. I just have to feel this way. I have to cry. I have to, it's all the love for grandpa that is still is not able to be expressed to him directly. That's what it is. Yeah. And so
what a beautiful way of putting it.
That's why I'm so sad. And I think the other thing is to talk about him, to tell stories about him. Funny stories too. I mean, there's a lot of humor in my life with my dad, and I will tell them the funny stories. So I think laughing and smiling helps process that grief and remembering those good things and just keeping that person sort of present in your life, even though they're not around anymore.
Yeah, keeping their memory alive and keeping them alive in your heart. And I think you touched on some really, really important things. One, not being afraid to talk about the individual. And I think sometimes we fear when a loved one or a close friend or someone has lost someone in their life, that we don't want to talk about it because we don't want to stir up feelings of pain by reminding them of their loss. And yet one of the best things I think we can do for someone who's grieving is to celebrate that person and the role or the place that they had in that individual's life. So giving place to that. And maybe the second thing being, and what a beautiful lesson to teach your boys in particular, because I've got a 20-month-old son, and I just think about how I want to help him to develop as an emotionally healthy male, where it's okay to feel feelings. It is okay to have feelings, and if anything, it's incredibly unhealthy to block and suppress them. And I love being male and masculine. I love being strong physically. It's part and parcel with being masculine, I guess. But I don't think it diminishes masculinity to have feelings and to feel them. And so dispelling that myth, I think is remarkable. Maybe one of the best gifts that you can give to your boys, that it's okay to feel these things and it's part of being human.
Absolutely. I think that is very important for boys today, especially growing up. I want my boys to be able to feel their emotions, recognize what they are, recognize where they're coming from. I always say, name it to tame it. Let's
I love that.
let's figure out what you're feeling right now. Are you frustrated? Are you mad? Are you tired? Are you hungry? Let's get to what it is that's causing this. And just being able to recognize, I think, is so important. And then, process it. And then okay, let's get into your feelings. Let's have them. And it is okay to cry. If it's something worth crying over, it's, you don't want to just cry about every little thing in the world, but we definitely
right.
want our boys to have those emotions and not to bottle them up. It's so unhealthy for you to have so much of that bottled up.
Yeah, I'm firmly convinced that suppressed emotions diminish our immunity and lead to health issues in ways that we can't necessarily measure in a scientific study. But I think we as human beings have this understanding that there is something about suppressed emotions that leads to some form of like dis-ease, really, we could say, in the body. Um, well, Lesley, it's truly been a pleasure chatting with you. I appreciate your openness and just sharing your experience here. I know it's been maybe a number of years. You probably spoke about it a lot, but I think it still takes courage to step forward and to share your experience. And so I really want to acknowledge you and appreciate that you're willing to come and do that to help other people as they navigate difficult experiences. So I wanted to thank you for that. And the final question I always like to ask my guests is if you could offer one nugget that you would like people to take away, if they've listened to this conversation today and you think, if I could just impart one little nugget I would like people to take away from this, what would that be?
I think it's that grief is survivable. It feels like the world is coming to an end when you lose someone that's so close to you, but you just keep taking one more step forward every day and you do get through it. And, resilience, and it's not about bouncing back. It's just being able to bend when the hard time comes. And you just have to, keep moving forward. Everybody experiences it. It's a collective feeling. Everybody's going to lose someone. And it gives me great comfort to know that there are other people out there feeling the same things that I'm feeling. So I think that knowing like, here's a person that has experienced grief on a very deep level and still managed to move forward, that would give me a lot of comfort. So I hope that gives other people comfort.
I love that. I think to myself, grief is inevitable in life because it's a part of being human, and it means that something precious and valuable has been in our life. But I love that final thought, just that grief is survivable. And maybe that's the thing that stops us from grieving, is this fear of what we'll experience if we allow grief to be fully expressed. So what a beautiful takeaway. Grief is survivable. Well, thank you so much, Lesley. It's truly been a pleasure chatting with you. And I'm just excited for what comes next for you.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.